welcome to the first ever episode of Falcon Quick Tips, in which that we are going to cover the nature of the market. Now, I want to give you a brief introduction in why I have created this series. So the thought behind Falcon Quick Tips is to create a series that I believe that highlights the most important part of the Falcon strategy. Things that I want to highlight that I believe that are sometimes overlooked or just misinterpreted. So I want to keep things simple, straight to the point, and something you guys and girls can watch over and over again and keep taking value from. So let's start and begin with the nature of the market. So firstly, what is the nature of the market? Now, the nature of the market is simply the characteristics of price action. So we have our phases, we have our impulse, we have our correction. So we have our impulsive phase and our corrective phase. The impulsive phase is normally that heavy momentum, those bigger moves either to the upside or to the downside. And then we have our corrective phases. These are normally either price moving sideways, and they normally take the shape of a pattern. Very low momentum, choppy price action sometimes can be the correction. So what we need to do as traders is that we need to identify what phase we're in. Once you know if you're in the impulsive phase or the corrective phase, you have a very, very good idea of what is going to happen next. So let's take a look at this. So let's look at this in a simple impulse correction. So we have our impulse, our correction, and then our impulse. So what we see is we have our heavy momentum with our impulse, which is with the trend, and then we have our correction, which is normally counter to the trend, followed by our impulse. So we have our heavy momentum, followed by our pattern, which is low momentum, this correction, and then we have our impulse. By doing that, we figure out what phase we're in. We know at this point, if we look at this at the corrective phase, we have a very good idea of what is to come next. So it really gives us a true edge. I often feel that the nature of the market is overlooked, but at the same time, single-handedly, the most important thing. Remember, trend lines, all these kind of things, that is just framework and guidelines from the nature. First, we understand the true nature of the market, then everything else will make much more sense and give us way more clarity within the market. So let's actually have a look at that on the chart. So you can see here I've got Euro Japanese yen. Now on the Euro Japanese yen, let's take a look at this price action that we have in here when I zoom in. So as you can see, something similar to what I previously just drew. We have our impulse, correction, and then our impulse. Notice how we have that heavy momentum followed by our correction, which is counter to the trend, and then we have our impulse, which is with the trend. You see how key, by understanding what phase we're in, it gives us a very, very good indication of what is to come next. By looking at this right now, understanding that this is the corrective part, see how this is a major key. It gives us a good indication of what possible opportunities do I want to look at next. Now, if we just look at this in the most simple format, let's zoom in a little bit more. Because look, guys and girls, the nature of how this is moving is the most important thing. And this is the part that I feel that is overlooked. Look at the impulsive phase, something that's very clear. We can clearly identify that this is an impulse, and we move into the correction. So what I would like you guys and girls to do is zoom in as much as possible to see, because sometimes what appears to be an impulse can sometimes be a correction, and it can get a little bit choppy, a little bit more in depth, but I'm going to go into more in-depth detailed in other videos that combine with that. But for now, just to keep that very, very simple, look at the impulsive nature and the corrective nature, and really look on that as many currency pairs as possible for you to really identify, right, what phase am I in? Am I in the impulsive phase or am I in the corrective phase? Now let's look at something that is not as clear, but in the same way. So previously that we had here, you can see that we've got our impulse and we have our correction. Notice how this big, deeper, messy correction is very, very different to this typical impulse, correction, impulse. Seems really simple, right? But in reality, sometimes the market is a little bit ugly. And I say this over and over again in Falcon, that sometimes we need to trade the market ugly. because we don't always get that textbook perfect picture. So understanding what phase we're in, as you can see, if you go back in previous webinars, we was always looking for Euro Yen to go to the upside because we understood that this was the impulsive phase. Even though that this was going down and you might think, is this going to keep going to the downside? We always knew because this was the corrective phase, no matter how deep it went, it was only a matter of time until this moved to the upside. So you see how understanding the true nature of the market, that really is your edge. Understanding how the nature of the market is truly moving. So I encourage you guys and girls to go onto as many charts as possible and write down, figure out what phase we're in by the nature. Look at the nature of the market, whether it's heavy momentum or low volatility, and figure out and write on the chart or write it down on a pen and paper, what phase am I in? Am I in a corrective phase or impulsive phase? And then look at the nature of the market. You'll see that they're going to line up together, because once you really truly understand the nature of the market, everything else really is framework, and you really do figure out that, right, I actually understand that this is the corrective phase versus this is the impulsive phase, and it just gives you that clarity. So I encourage you to do that, guys and girls. I really want you to take this part serious. And for some of you might be thinking, you know, I may have heard this before. It's a very simplistic approach, but at the same time, it is overlooked, because understanding nature is the difference between you getting into trades too early or getting into trades too late. And then it causes all kind of psychological problems. Getting into trades because of the fear of missing out, right? That is by not understanding the true nature. So you see how all of these psychological problems that most traders have before they get consistent is because they don't realize that there is a lack of clarity there, a lack of true clarity. When you're really honest with yourself, there's something that's quite missing. And what I found in my own experience and my journey, that it was the nature of the market. Once I really took that seriously, everything else just fell into place, and it just made things much more simple. So I really hope you've enjoyed this episode. I'm going to touch on some more in-depth stuff, but I want to get the process right and keep things simple, and everything is going to link together. So I really hope you enjoy this series, and if you've taken any value from this, send me a message or an email. I'd really, really appreciate it. But I hope you guys and girls have an incredible day, and I will see you on the next episode.